The story of the Mohawk warriors in the American Revolution begins long before the first musket was fired, because the Mohawk people had stood as protectors of the eastern door of the Haudenosaunee Confederacy for centuries, and they entered the 18th century with a reputation for discipline, political insight, and fierce loyalty to their alliances. The Mohawk Nation was one of the 6 nations of the Iroquois Confederacy, and their villages along the Mohawk River in what is now New York made them a crucial center of trade, diplomacy, and military power in colonial North America. The Mohawk leaders were familiar with both British and colonial settlers, and for decades they had used political skill to maintain alliances that protected their people. But as tensions rose between Britain and the American colonies, the Mohawk faced decisions that would shape their future forever. Few figures illustrate this moment better than Thaindonija, known to the British as Joseph Brant, who had been educated in colonial schools, spoke English fluently, and traveled to London, yet remained deeply committed to defending the sovereignty of the Haudenosaunee nations. When revolution erupted in 1775, Brant and many Mohawk felt that the British Crown, despite its flaws, had at least attempted to limit colonial expansion onto native lands, while the rebelling colonists had repeatedly ignored boundaries and treaties, especially those that protected Haudenosaunee territory. The proclamation of 1763 had drawn a line the colonists hated, while native nations, including the Mohawk, saw it as one of the only formal protections they had left. As conflict intensified, the Mohawk faced internal division, because some in the Confederacy favored neutrality while others believed that survival required choosing the British side, and this debate shook the unity of the entire Haudenosaunee League. The Mohawk, living closest to British settlements and having strong ties through trade and diplomacy, were among the first to commit firmly to the Crown, believing that a British victory would provide the best chance of preserving their homelands. Joseph Brant sought support not only from Mohawk warriors, but from other Haudenosaunee nations as well. And although the Confederacy had historically acted as a unified political body, the Revolution fractured that unity as never before. The Oneida and Tuscarora chose to support the Americans, while the Mohawk, Seneca, Cayuga, and Onondaga largely stood with the British, turning the conflict into both a colonial war and a civil war within the Confederacy itself. Mohawk warriors began launching raids on rebel settlements, targeting ammunition stores, military posts, and frontier towns that had been pushing into native land even before the Revolution began. In July of 1777, the Mohawk and other Haudenosaunee warriors played a major role in the Battle of Oriskany, one of the bloodiest engagements of the entire war, where they fought alongside British and Loyalist forces to stop an American militia column advancing toward Fort Stanwix. The battle quickly devolved into brutal close combat, fought in dense forest and deep ravines, and the Mohawk warriors used their knowledge of terrain to strike with precision, marking one of the first major battles where native forces played a decisive combat role. Oriskany devastated American militia forces, but it also deepened the rift between the Haudenosaunee nations, because the Oneida warriors fighting for the Americans found themselves on the opposite side of their Mohawk cousins. After Oriskany, Joseph Brant's reputation as a military leader spread rapidly, and his raids across New York's frontier were both strategic and symbolic, targeting settlements that had encroached on native lands. American leaders viewed Brant as a dangerous adversary, and colonial propaganda worked hard to portray him as ruthless, even though many accounts demonstrate that he often acted to restrain unnecessary violence. Still, the frontier war grew increasingly brutal as both sides responded to raids with reprisals, and violence spread across the Mohawk Valley, burning villages, farms, and crops in a cycle of destruction. In 1779, General George Washington ordered what became known as the Sullivan Campaign, a sweeping military expedition meant to punish the Haudenosaunee nations allied with the British and break their support for the Crown. Sullivan's forces destroyed dozens of Haudenosaunee towns, burned crops, uprooted orchards, and devastated food supplies to force surrender through starvation, and Mohawk villages were among those targeted. The winter that followed was one of the hardest the Mohawk had ever faced, and many families fled north to British-controlled Canada for safety. Throughout the war, Mohawk warriors continued fighting in raids and battles, often alongside Loyalist units such as Butler's Rangers, and they became a key component of Britain's strategy to disrupt American supply lines and frontier settlements. Joseph Brant also worked tirelessly as a diplomat, traveling to secure support and supplies for displaced Mohawk families while maintaining communication with British commanders. Even after the British began losing ground in the later years of the war, the Mohawk remained committed allies, hoping that a British victory would protect their land from American expansion. But when the Treaty of Paris was signed in 1783, ending the Revolution, the British abandoned their native allies completely, granting the new United States vast territory without even consulting the tribes who had fought for them. For the Mohawk, this betrayal was devastating because they had sacrificed their towns, farms, and many lives in support of a government that ultimately gave away their homeland in the final negotiations. With their villages destroyed and American settlers pushing deeper into the Mohawk Valley, many Mohawk followed Joseph Brant north to Canada, where the British granted them land along the Grand River in what is now Ontario. This new homeland became the foundation of the Six Nations of the Grand River community, which remains today as one of the most historically significant Indigenous settlements in Canada. Brant helped establish schools, churches, and political systems in the new community, ensuring that Mohawk culture, governance, and identity would endure despite the loss of their original homeland. The Mohawk who stayed in the United States faced continued pressure from settler expansion, but they also fought to preserve their traditions, language, and governance within a rapidly changing world. The outcome of the American Revolution had permanently reshaped the map of North America, but it had also reshaped Haudenosaunee unity, pushing the Confederacy into decades of rebuilding. Even after the war ended, the legacy of the Mohawk warriors influenced diplomacy, land negotiations, and later conflicts across the region because their military skill and political influence had become well known to both British and American leaders. Joseph Brant spent his later years advocating for native land rights, traveling, negotiating, and writing extensively about the promises colonial governments failed to keep. Today, the legacy of the Mohawk warriors in the American Revolution is remembered not only as a military alliance, but as a struggle for sovereignty, identity, and survival in the face of overwhelming change. Their story reveals how the Revolution was not just a war for independence, but a battle that transformed the lives of Native nations whose futures were largely excluded from the outcome. The Mohawk fought for the allies they believed would defend their land, and even though those allies abandoned them, the Mohawk endured, rebuilt, and preserved their culture in new lands. The story of the Mohawk warriors remains essential to understanding the American Revolution because it highlights the indigenous experience that shaped the conflict far beyond the 13 colonies. Their courage, diplomacy, and sacrifice stand as a testament to a nation determined to survive the upheaval of empire and revolution. Their involvement reminds us that the founding of the United States came at great cost to Native peoples, and their resilience continues to shape the cultural landscape of North America. If you enjoyed this historical presentation and would like to explore more Native American history, indigenous heroes, or forgotten chapters of the past, please like this video and subscribe to the channel, because your support helps us continue producing educational content that preserves these stories. If there is another Native nation, historical event, or cultural topic you would like us to cover next, leave a comment below and let us know, because we read every suggestion and love creating videos based on your ideas.